Hello and welcome. My name is MX Dash. This is Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha, which I think is one of the best Street Fighter games of all time. Now, this was originally based on the arcade version, which was simply known as Street Fighter EX. And later the arcade version would get an updated version called Street Fighter EX Plus, which added a few characters, but really it didn't really add any new features as far as I know. But the PlayStation 1 version, in my opinion, is superior. In fact, I think this game is extremely underrated, and to be honest, I actually like this game so much that it's probably my second most favorite of all the Street Fighter games. Now, Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition is probably my most favorite, but even that game lacks features that this game has that I think are really awesome. Alright, now the first thing you might notice about this game would be the graphics. Now the graphics, it's very typical early PlayStation 1 graphics, but the reason why this game doesn't look as good as some of the later PlayStation 1 games, it's because the developers needed the game to run at a silky smooth frame rate of, 60 frames a second. And that's really a benefit to this kind of game, because this game, particularly fighting games in general, you need a smooth game in order to get the best gameplay. But the thing that I think makes Street Fighter EX better than Street Fighter 2 and even the Street Fighter Alpha games would be how responsive the controls are. Alright, now, so I'm just going to talk about some of the characters in this game. Let's start from the middle and work our way to the right. First we have Ryu, then Ken, Chun-Li, D-Doc. Now he's a new character in Street Fighter EX. Of course we got Guile. Now Skelomania, also a new character. Then we have Pollen, who's also a new character. Zangief, everyone's favorite Russian. C-Jack, which actually stands for Crackerjack, also a new character. Hakuto, new character. Now Street Fighter EX Plus on the arcade added a few characters. Kairi, I think that's how you pronounce it. Now Kairi, he's actually the brother to Hakuto, I think. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Then you got Alan. Now, Alan is your typical Ryu clone. Really nothing special about the guy. Blair, she's a very original character, I think. Duran, he's a wrestler. And of course a few that some of you might recognize. Akuma, M. Bison, and a new character, Garuda. Now, Garuda, M. Bison, and Akuma are like the boss characters. Like the original Street Fighter 2, you could not select these boss characters only in the updated Street Fighter EX Plus. But the PlayStation 1 version, which is the version we're playing, added two more characters, Dhalsim and Sakura. Now, when I first played this game, I thought Sakura was a boy because of her boyish look. When I got into the game, that, oh, this guy has a dress, so I was like, oh, it's a girl. But I actually learned to like this character because she was really flexible and pretty fast, and her attacks were pretty effective. She was actually my favorite character when I was a kid, but my favorite character now is Chun-Li. I just think that she's extremely powerful and she's easy to use, and this is where Street Fighter EX, in my opinion, gets it right versus the other Street Fighter games. See, for those that are familiar with Chun-Li will know that her moves are difficult to do because you can't just do, like, let's say, back forward punch to make her shoot a fireball or something like that. No, you actually have to hold back for a few seconds, and that really is a pain when it comes to fighting, because you really can't just stand still or walk back. You gotta be able to react instantly, and having to be burdened by having to hold a button in is a pain. And fortunately they fixed this in Street Fighter EX, and that's a real shame that they did not keep this in later Street Fighter games. Because with Chun-Li, if you wanted to do a spinning bird kick, instead of holding back and then pushing forward kick, or holding, some other versions require you to hold down and push up kick. It's really awkward, but in this game you just push down forward kick. Really easy. You don't have to hold any buttons. Alright, now going back to the graphics, I really don't think this is obviously better than the 2D graphics in other Street Fighter games, but I do think that the polygon graphics has an advantage over the 2D graphics. Now here's the thing. If the 2D graphics were animated at 60 frames a second, then it wouldn't be an issue, but what is an issue in the 2D games, especially in Street Fighter 2, where there's like 3 frames for each attack of animation, and 3 frames, it's just not enough frames to allow the player to react to. In fact, in Street Fighter 2, most of the time, the very first frame of an attack is the frame that makes contact with the opponent. So it's literally impossible to react doesn't matter how good your reflexes are, you won't be able to react to something that quick. Now, with polygon graphics, the animation's a lot smoother. As a result, you can actually see attacks coming. So a lot of it is got to do with reflexes rather than luck or memorization. Like sometimes people will memorize the patterns of some of these characters, the way they fight. Whereas in Street Fighter EX, the great thing about the AI in Street Fighter EX is that they rely a lot on adaptive AI. So the AI will come up with its own strategies, and if it works, if the strategy is working against you, they're going to keep doing that until you adapt, until you counteract those attacks, and then the AI is going to try something else. It's a very intelligent AI. This is something I've not really seen in a lot of fighters. Now a lot of people say Street Fighter 3 is the superior Street Fighter, but I don't know. I think that Street Fighter 3 feels a little bit more like a Darkstalkers game than a Street Fighter game because of the, there's just so many like weird characters, and the game is very surreal. Whereas Street Fighter 2, even Street Fighter 1 was a more realistic approach. Like you fight against like people of different martial arts and fighting abilities, and most of them are very typical of their country that they're from. Particularly in Street Fighter 2, you have like Zangief from Russia, and he does a lot of wrestling. And you've got, Ryu from Japan, Chun-Li from China. They have these, they are good representations of their countries. Street Fighter 3 didn't really have that. It felt like a completely different game, even though it is a very good game. But Street Fighter EX definitely captures this original concept of, best warriors around the world. Take Pollum for an example. She's definitely from the Middle East, but like a royal princess, sort of like got that Aladdin feel to it. The characters are very colorful and very got a lot of variety to them. Now, of course, even though I said that Street Fighter 3 has a lot of strange characters, Street Fighter EX as well as Street Fighter 2 have a few weird characters. In the case of Street Fighter 2, Blanka is the weird character. And this game also has a weird character, and that character would have to be Skullomania. And I actually really like Skullomania. He handles really well, and he's not overpowering, but he's very fun to play as. Definitely one of the most underrated characters in the Street Fighter franchise. Now, I have to talk about the sound effects and the music in this game. Now, here's the thing. Music in Street Fighter games were almost always good. I say almost because I'm not actually a huge fan of the music in Street Fighter 3. And I know I sound like I'm actually making fun of Street Fighter 3 a lot, but no, still, Street Fighter 3 is still a fantastic game. It's just that I'm not a fan of the music in Street Fighter 3. It doesn't really get me excited to play the game. Street Fighter 2 did that brilliantly. So did Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Alpha 3. Street Fighter 4 also did a fantastic job, but I think that the music in Street Fighter EX plus Alpha for the PlayStation is absolutely fantastic. The arcade version isn't that great. I think it might have something to do with the instruments that the arcade version was using. But the PlayStation 1 sounds fantastic. The music's very catchy. Now, the music isn't always catchy, but a lot of the tracks are actually really good, very well composed. The sound effects, I believe the sound effects are the best in the series. Like, when you punch someone, it really sounds painful. When you kick them, it really sounds painful. And when you block attacks, it still sounds like you've been hit really hard, even if it's not really draining your health. Now, the thing that makes Street Fighter EX quite special from the other Street Fighter games would have to be, obviously, the EX meter. Now, the thing that's unique about the EX meter is that you can actually chain special attacks. So the combos are pretty much like other Street Fighter games. In fact, the gameplay is just as good as any other Street Fighter game. I don't see why people don't think this game isn't as good as the likes of Street Fighter 3 or the Street Fighter Alpha series. Probably the reason why people did not like it is because of its primitive 3D graphics, as opposed to, the really nice 2D graphics that Street Fighter is famous for. And probably also because, there were so many other Street Fighter games released when this game came out on both the arcade and on the PlayStation. But the part that I love most about the PlayStation 1 version would have to be its added features. not only the added characters, but also the added game types. Obviously, there's your normal arcade mode, your versus, team battle, which is really awesome, time attack, survival, and of course practice. Now, practice actually has another feature than just training mode. It has a feature called expert mode. Now, expert mode is basically there to teach you how to do all of the moves of the characters, but not just the moves, but also combos. It's a lot like what Street Fighter 4 has. You know, Street Fighter 4 lets you unlock colors and taunts. This game actually unlocks characters. Now, granted, these characters are good, but they're not amazing. I mean, but you can unlock Dark Ryu and Dark Hakuto, and Cycloid B and Cycloid R, which are sort of like these polygon characters that mimics a lot of other characters' moves. Team Battle is just my favorite. A friend of mine had a PlayStation, and he had borrowed this game from a friend of his. We started playing the game, and we were like, hey, there's Team Battle, and then we realized, oh, sweet, we can pick 5 characters, and there were 5 of us to play the game. So each of us would pick our favorite character, and we would just try and beat the other team. The only complaints I have about this game would be Akuma. Now, to encounter Akuma, you actually have to beat the arcade mode without, I think, being defeated even once. So Akuma is really, really cheap. Not because he's really powerful, but because all of his moves always overrides your moves. Let's say you do jump kick, and clearly it's gonna hit his face, but he does an uppercut and that kick means nothing. That's the only thing I don't like about Akuma. Fortunately, this cheap Akuma does not exist in the multiplayer mode. When you select Akuma in the multiplayer mode, he's pretty much like Ryu, only his moves are slightly different. But that is literally the only issue I have with this game. Now, of course, you can actually unlock cheap Akuma. You can also unlock cheap M. Bison and cheap Garuda. But, you know, they're the hardest ones to unlock, and I would not recommend unlocking them because you got the normal ones unlocked right from the start anyways. So really, ultimately, you have a pretty large roster of characters to choose from, about 3 times bigger than the original arcade version. So yeah, this is Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha. I'd strongly recommend it. It is a lot of fun. The controls are extremely responsive. The music is great. The sound effects great. The gameplay is fantastic. The EX feature is really a lot of fun and interesting, and it is a real test of skill. Ultimately, I love this game. It is my second most favorite Street Fighter game of all time. Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition being my most favorite in the series. Don't judge this game based on its arcade counterparts. Although in the core gameplay is the same, everything else is actually pretty much different. The music isn't as good, there aren't as many features, and yeah, so ultimately stick with this PS1 version. This is the superior version. It is a great game, and I highly recommend it for those that own a PlayStation 1. Or even if you own a PS2 and a PS3, you'll be able to play this game on those consoles as well.